Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Mantra Matcha. Mantra Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, Matcha has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners to Make It Make Sense can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right. Let's get on with the show. It's Thursday, February 26th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, what was left out of the State of the Union is much more interesting than what was actually in it. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Trump did say in his speech that you do need to know about if you didn't watch the longest State of the Union in history. And if you didn't watch it, honestly, I envy you a little bit. But what I want to focus on was what wasn't in this address, specifically the fact that he left out ICE and immigration enforcement deployments almost entirely. And he also left out the One Big Beautiful Bill Act completely, his signature piece of legislation in this last year. And if you want to know more about what was in the State of the Union, this week's article on the Make It Make Sense Substack is all about how the biggest accomplishments and policy ideas that Trump touted can actually be tracked back to before his administration or directly to someone else, meaning Trump did what he does best, slapped his name on a bunch of things that aren't his. Also, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment or a review. It really helps give the show a boost. All right. Let's get on with the show. On Tuesday night, the president gave the longest State of the Union address in U.S. history, breaking his own record he set in 2020 for the State of the Union and his record for a speech to a joint session of Congress by a president that he set last year. The speech was an hour and 47 minutes long. Of that time, 40 minutes were spent in applause breaks from members of Congress, which comes out to just under 40% of the entire speech. Now, when he was speaking, most of it was just introducing guests or then attacking Democrats or, frankly, just making things up. I mean, the longest amount of time he spent talking about anything was this gruesome story of the helicopter pilot Chief Warrant Officer Eric Salver, who was wounded while he flew during the mission to capture Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. Trump spent nearly 4 minutes on that story, which I assume he was embellishing a lot of Salver's heroism, which probably didn't need any embellishing anyway, but that was the longest time he's been talking without being interrupted by applause. The speech itself was both boring and at times disturbing, specifically the racist moment when he called Somali immigrants pirates and said they had a culture of criminality in Minnesota. He also tried to bait Democrats into booing or not standing for things like his biggest applause line of the night, which was this.
Tonight, I'm inviting every legislator to join with my administration in reaffirming a fundamental principle. If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens.
So, obviously, Democrats didn't stand for a line that was meant as pure theater. If for no other reason at all, then all those people who did stand have been making excuses for an administration that has violated the civil rights of U.S. citizens, detained them, and also shot and killed at least 3 since Trump took office. Not exactly protecting American citizens there. Now, that moment was supposed to be the moment of the night for Republicans, and it is already being used in an ad by a group called American Sovereignty. And Stephen Miller took to social media saying it was a moment that chills to the bone, which will live for 1,000 years. Which, for starters, it was an applause line where they knew what was going to happen happened. And second, the only people who say things like something will live for 1,000 years are Nazis. They're always the ones seeming to be talking about 1,000-year Reich or rule or whatever. And there were a lot of ways to say what Miller meant here, and instead he just chose the Nazi one. Whatever. For all of the blustering and telling people that the economy was good and chaos isn't happening, Trump left out the signature piece of his first year in office: ICE. Nowhere in the entire speech did he mention ICE as an agency, as officers. Did he mention DHS agents, Border Patrol agents, Miller as the architect of his entire administration's agenda on immigration, Tom Homan, who was sent to pick up the pieces in Minneapolis. He didn't mention Greg Bovino, who led the charge in major cities like Chicago. He didn't even mention Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. He went out of his way to thank the Agriculture Secretary for lowering the price of food, which he doesn't control and isn't even true, but not the woman who was in charge of his most important agency. I mean, this could have been a speech where, in saying the true thing, that border crossings and encounters are at an all-time low. I mean, Trump said they're at 0, and the DHS number shows it's actually around 9,700 as of January, but let's not get too bogged down in the details. He could have used this speech to thank the work of Border Patrol for those low numbers. He could have praised the brave men and women of ICE who went out every single day to track down the worst of the worst, while crazed paid protesters assault them at record numbers while trying to dox them and harm their families. Now, I talked about why those things aren't true in an episode last week, but that's not really the point. He could have done that. He could have touted the fact that ICE got $75 billion more to keep Americans safe, and because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, DHS now has a budget that would make it the 7th largest military in the world if it were a country. The only time he mentioned his flagship department was when he was lamenting that Democrats had forced DHS to shut down, but he didn't mention that it was over wanting to change the way ICE agents behave. It was really bizarre that DHS wasn't a part of this State of the Union, but it also does make a little bit of sense. National approval ratings of ICE and the administration's immigration policies are at an all-time low, a negative 14%, meaning 14% more people in the country disapprove of the president's handling of immigration, and 51% of the country thinks immigration is heading in the wrong direction under Trump. Nearly 60% think ICE has gone too far, and a majority of people only believe that undocumented immigrants should be deported if they're adults who have been here less than 5 years, or if they've committed crimes other than immigration crimes. That's a far cry from the administration's position that any immigrant who crossed the border illegally has had their immigration status changed either by accident or by executive order, or were born to undocumented immigrant parents should be deported. And just before the State of the Union, we learned from not one but 2 sets of internal documents that ICE agents have specifically been trained not to do the exact things that they've been doing, but then they were also told to ignore that training. The federal watchdog group American Oversight obtained and published the 2025 training for ICE agents that explicitly says they have to tell people why they're being arrested and identify themselves at the time of arrest. They are not allowed to engage with protesters unless they've attempted to defuse the situation first, and the warrants being given to ICE agents do not let them enter homes and businesses and other private property to make arrests. And then just a few days later, a former ICE agent turned whistleblower said this at a Senate hearing.
Without a judicial warrant. The acting ICE director authorized the very conduct that DHS, in its own 2025 legal training materials, had called the chief evil against which the wording of the Fourth Amendment is directed.
So what you've got is sinking polling on immigration, written proof that agents aren't following training, and testimony under oath that they're being told not to follow that training. In any normal presidency, it would make sense about why you wouldn't hear about those things in the State of the Union. But nothing about Trump's presidency has been normal. And he spent a lot of time lying or just making things up about the accomplishments in his State of the Union, so why not do it with ICE? Or at the very least, say what we've seen from ICE and DHS is exactly what 77 million Americans voted for, because it is. Now, the other big thing missing from this speech was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. If you don't remember what that was, it was the massive funding bill that Republicans passed over the summer. It was the signature piece of legislation that Trump wanted done before the midterms. He mentioned it in roundabout ways, like saying they passed the largest tax cut in history, which it really wasn't. It was actually the second smallest, according to the Tax Foundation. The cuts were also heavily skewed towards the super rich. Again, let's not get bogged down here. He also said it lifted 2.4 million Americans off of food stamps, which again isn't true. It cut services to 2.5 million Americans, which isn't the same thing as not needing them. But he never mentions the bill by name. And at no point did he make the case for it, saying something like, we passed this bill, Republicans passed this bill, and because of that, our borders are more secure, we're getting rid of renewable energy, and we're cutting your taxes. And because of that, that's why you should keep us in power this November. None of those things were said from Trump in this speech. And that is really what this State of the Union was about. I talked about it on Tuesday and how this was Trump's largest chance to talk to the American people about why they should re-elect or elect Republicans to keep them in full control of the government. It was his chance to prove that he can still be an effective president, that he was working for voters, and that Republicans deserve to work with him. And by not doing that, Republicans are left without any way forward. Friend of the show and GOP strategist Matt Bartlett told Politico this week, in terms of a political speech, there was no policy prescription that will guide Republicans towards safer ground in the midterms. In that same article, another unnamed strategist said, I wish we had more detailed steps to take directing Congress to do more for people who are hurting. And you would normally expect to see a president lean on their biggest policy initiatives and successes, which for Trump are immigration enforcement, unpopular right now or not, and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, again, unpopular or not. So much of Trump's speech and, frankly, day-to-day musings are lies or exaggerations or misleading statements that basically say, believe me, don't believe your lying eyes. So why not do it here? I honestly don't have a good answer for you. It looks like Republicans are hoping that the fight over immigration, just the fight, will be enough. But what's called the enthusiasm gap, or how excited voters are to vote for their party right now between Democrats and Republicans, is huge. 14% more Democrats say they're likely to vote than Republicans this November. And if the message from the White House out of this State of the Union, which Republicans have to follow in lockstep or else, is ignore the two most important things we did all year while asking for the time and money and votes of Americans, that is a tough sell for the next 9 months. All right. That is it for today's episode. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack to get access to that brand new article today talking about all the things that Trump just put his name on in this latest State of the Union. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. All one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.